Hello and welcome to the Trading Bell. I'm Norkit Kimboy. Today we are focusing on manufacturing. How do we reach the 2030 goal of 20% contribution towards the GDP from the current 7%? At the same time, what is the agenda and strategy for the year 2023? I'll be talking to Anthony Mwangi, the Chief Executive Officer of Kenya Association of Manufacturers. Let's take a look at his profile.
Anthony Mwangi is the Chief Executive, Kenya Association of Manufacturers. He's an accomplished professional with over 20 years of experience in government and regulatory affairs, public policy, public affairs, communication, stakeholder management and business development, cutting across various industries including transportation, ICT, aviation and oil and gas. Before joining KAM in August, he has worked at Bolt since November 2020 as the head of public policy for East Africa and the Horn. Previously, he was the Director of Government Public Affairs and Communication for Tullow Oil till March 2020. He has also served as the leader of IBM Government and Regulatory Affairs for East Africa from 2012 to 2015. Before IBM, Anthony worked for Kenya Airways as the head of Government and Industry Affairs for 7 years until November 2012. He has also held senior positions in various organizations including Samsung Electronics and MFI Office Solutions.
Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Noah.
Now, starting off, I look at manufacturing, and it is one of the major drivers globally when it comes to changing and transforming economies. It holds so much potential, but for Kenya, it seems to be one of those not so tapped areas holding so much potential. So far, the year 2022, what are the biggest lessons that you've taken that you're carrying into the year 2023?
Thank you, Noah. And as you've mentioned, it is indeed a challenge that Kenyan manufacturing has been contributing, declining in terms of contribution to GDP to currently 70.2%. And if you look at our development proxies, that is a country that you compare ourselves with, you'll find that China contributes about 28%, Egypt is 30%, South Africa 14%, India about 15%. But Kenya has kind of faced a challenge over time, not because manufacturing itself is shrinking, it's because there are sectors that have been growing faster than manufacturing. Manufacturing, absolute numbers for manufacturing in 2022 grew by 6.9%. However, other sectors, the telco, banking, services, retail, they grew faster, and therefore that is why our contribution became low. However, it doesn't mean that we are doing well. We could do more, and that is why we are 2023, we are now focused on what you're calling Kenya Manufacturing Agenda 20 by 30, which you've agreed with the government is the way to go. That means that we want, in 8 years, we want to high grade manufacturing contribution from 7.2% to 20%.
That's quite it reminds me of Martin Luther King. They say, I have a dream. But for you to achieve a dream, you have to strategize and be intentional about that. So in terms of making that jump in the next 8 years, as you put it, Vision 2030, 20% contribution, what are we doing?
So, contrary to what perhaps we did in 2022 and perhaps 2021 and the years before, we have looked at and adopted what we're calling value chain approach. We have 13 productive sectors, and the 14th sector that supports manufacturing, the banking, the insurance, the ICT, and legal. But for the 13 sectors, we've mapped out all the opportunities and looked at if we're indeed going to grow from 7.2 to 20% in 8 years, that is 3x growth. You need to look at the sectors that can give you equivalent of or higher growth using the Pareto principle 80 by 20. So looking at all the sectors, we've mapped out and we have seen that indeed it is possible within that time frame to actually grow to 20%. How? I'll give you some examples. And quite interesting numbers. If you look at textile, our development proxy or the comparator country that we are using on textile and apparel is Bangladesh, because they've done it. Bangladesh in terms of size is kind of a subset of Kenya, maybe a size of central Kenya, with 170 million people. But they have been able to grow the apparel sector, and they're exporting over $50 billion to the world market, employing between 4.2 to 4.5 million people in that sector alone. Now, in Kenya, out of the size of the pie that we call the US market, which we have duty-free access, we have quota-free access, it is over 100 billion US dollars. We are only exporting $550 million. It is a drop in the big ocean. Is it doable that we can do more? 20 by 30, we are looking at high grading that, growing that, $1.5 billion to $2 billion.
That's quite interesting, because when you talk about possibilities, there's so much possibility in this country.
Yes.
The willingness, at least setting up such infrastructure, it's one step closer to achieving that. But at the heart of the matter, the soul of the issue is the policies that we set and the implementation of those policies. In terms of manufacturing, has that been something that we are intentional about?
I think the policy environment in Kenya has been a big challenge. It has been patchwork of, work along as we go down the road. If you compare with other countries, you look at China, how they developed. They had a disastrous development and the experiments that they tried under their former leader between 49 and 78, the Mao Zedong, the big leap forward, in the defense-driven industrialization, the cultural revolution. Then come 1978, under Deng Xiaoping, and you can see that the golden years of China between 78 and 2010, only 44 years later to today, China has been able to get people out of poverty, hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. 44 years. Mm-hmm. We can be able to do that in the next 10 years because the hard infrastructure is there. If you go around the country now, we have trunk roads, we have feeder roads, we have power, we are generating power. Of course, it could be better and needs to be better. It needs to be affordable. But we can conclusively say that hard infrastructure successively has been put in place. What is lacking is the software, which is the policy, the regulatory framework, which is muddled by a lot of inefficiencies and a lot of regulatory overreach. Mm-hmm. That is what this 20 by 30 is attempting to do. If you look at in Africa, someone who has been a reference case, if you read the story of some great leaders of Africa that have been able to really transform their countries, and what comes to mind is someone like Thomas Sankara, a 32-year-old who was able to transform Upper Volta, rebrand the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, rebrand the people's psyche in terms of their values from people who perhaps do not have a common identity to Burkina-based. Today, you find Burkina-based are proud of their identity because it's an honorable person. Right?
Yes.
Moved literacy levels from 20% to high of 60s, 70s, was able to move from food deficiency to food surplus. 32-year-old in 4 years. So we can also, with the consistency, being very deliberate on how we put policies together to drive the growth.
Okay.
And it's not an option, because if you look at the employment challenge that we have, every year on average you're getting about 1 million people joining the labor market. Whether they dropped off at grade 1, grade 5, grade 8, now, CBC, high school, university, college, they are joining the labor market. If you go back and see 15 years, that every year we have a pipeline full of millions of people who are waiting to join the job market, we really don't have an option. We must put together the policies that will actually drive manufacturing. Definitely. Because that is where the engine of growth is.
Definitely. One of the issues...
And I'm very passionate about it.
Yeah, I know. I can tell, actually. And it's very important. And manufacturing, even by the term itself, it sounds like a heavy cup kind of, engagement, and it needs investment. Now, I've seen the president while he was visiting the Nairobi Securities Exchange talking about raising capital and investing in our very own. Now, there's the two approaches. There is getting, investors, people who already have the muscles to come and set up here in the country to boost the sector. And there is also the other option of using the stock exchange to raise capital. As manufacturers, how are you exploring these two options?
So we've seen the evolution of Nairobi Stock Exchange, and it's been tremendous. Of course, there have been quite a number of years where it's been a bit dry. We don't have a lot of IPOs. But if you look at Kengen, for instance, when it was listed at the counter, it elicited a lot of interest. So we haven't, because you look at manufacturing, you find there are big companies. Majority of our members are SMEs. Most of those big companies find some are listed, some are not, others are family businesses. But I think there is a great opportunity for us to work with NSC to make sure that we are preparing even SMEs to list at NSC as an alternative source of capital. Because you've seen one of the biggest challenges that we always deal with is access to finance. How do you get capital to expand your business, to go to exports? And I think NSC provides us an opportunity, and perhaps the right time to start. I know engagements have been there, but we need to kind of be deliberate about that, so that our members can be able to know and can be able to be educated how they can raise capital from NSC.
In terms of a healthy balance, especially when it comes to involvement of the capital markets, is there a ratio that you're supposed to encourage, or is it natural, just let things be? Should we encourage more people to come to the stock exchange? What impact does that have vis-a-vis encouraging people, individual companies that can be able to do their thing without, public infusion of public money?
My view, this is my personal view, this is not the view of KAM, is that listing, in the public stock markets, it's primarily to raise capital, right? And to share prosperity. Now, that is an individual company decision. There are global companies that are extremely big, but they remain as family businesses for generations. So is it wrong not to list? I think it's not wrong if you can be able to raise capital, alternative capital.
Yes.
Then, I would say it's an individual company decision.
Okay.
But I think we'd like to see more companies, and especially the SMEs, even if it's on alternative counters, to start scaling and growing, using, stock exchange.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And recently, talking about external investors,
Yes.
you mentioned policy, sort of having a weak policy stance. It impacts on investment, especially global players who are looking at key markets that they can put their money and get value for it. What are we doing? Are we doing anything different 2023 to see more players come in and invest, especially big investors?
So there's a big push by the government to showcase the opportunities that are there. And recently, I know the government was in the US during US Africa Summit, and there were many engagements that were had. So we can see and we encourage the government to continue doing that. But again, even before you go to look for external investors, it is extremely important for you to ensure that investors in your country who are local investors are producing at the optimal level or maximum level. If I go around most of the factories here in Kenya, they are producing at 50%. Most of the production facilities are idle. One shift instead of 24-hour shifts in an industry. Why? Challenges from electricity is extremely expensive. Reliability of power. Some of these factories, when the power trips, it takes about 6 hours to power it on. So if it trips in the morning, you have to let people go for the day because it's going to take half a day, So there are things that needs to be done, not only for foreign investors, but all investors. And that's what we said, taxation. It cannot be a patchwork. Every finance bill, the environment changes. And that's why we are pushing hard as now coming to directly to your question. We have made over 250 proposals for this budget preparation, season, to be able to start having those policies that encourage competitiveness in the market. Because this is what is affecting us, both from exporting to other countries and also attracting investors to come to the country. Labor issues. Where now labor, we talk about minimum wage, not productivity based, right? It's a hot subject. But it get to a point where we need to talk about that because it affects us, right? And then now outside the factory, if you have a factory in Nairobi and you're taking your goods to a county like Turkana or Busia, every county you pass, you have to pay levies. It's like we're in 47 different countries, Yeah. So there's no leveraging on what we have. If you have a branded vehicle, then you have to pay for branding. You pay for branding in Nairobi, in Kiambu, in Nakuru, in Uasin Gishu, in Baringo. Before you get there, and a lot, it's not easy, it's not cheap.
Yes.
So these are the things that you're saying. That this continues to create a drag on the Kenyan economy. Nobody, they may be there, but people cannot confidently come and invest while they do not know how next year will be.
Definitely.
Yeah. So taxation policy need to be stabilized. These levies need to be knocked down and combined. And the government and counties, they need to figure out how to share that revenue if they have to earn a revenue from every truck, that takes goods from Nairobi to, So, you look at issues of Forex, availability. At what point should we continue having kind of regulated CBK Forex rate? Because what the issue and perhaps what you get from the banks is different. All these contribute to uncertainty. So business people and manufacturers spend a lot of time thinking about these things as opposed to being on the factory floor.
Definitely. Yeah, that's quite a concern. Briefly, because we're almost coming to an end. First of all, I think there's so much potential because our counties, diversity, there's power in diversity. And looking at our counties, 47 of them differently endowed. In terms of the strategy that we are applying, touching on manufacturing to be county specific, is it also one of the strategies that we are approaching in terms of boosting manufacturing in the country?
Yes, so we've looked at 4 pillars for 2023, 2024, 2025. And one which cut across is competitiveness, global competitiveness. We need to be able to compete with the best in the world. We are a global village. The world is a global village. We cannot be talking about being competitive within East Africa. If you're dealing with apparels, we are competing with Chinese, we are competing with Bangladesh, we are competing with India, we are competing with everybody. So you need to be competitive. From power costs, from logistics, from everything. But also at the factory level, we need to be competitive. That's one, briefly. Now, number 2, we have export-led growth. And maybe if I just go back to competitiveness. So we're working with on a program where we're going to have an assessment of county industrial competitiveness. But there are industries that cut across. For instance, automotive. We are importing or selling over 300,000 motorbikes every year. These motorbikes are across the country. So even without overthinking, we can have production bases, assembly points at every county to assemble motorcycles. We only need to put the policy in place where stop bringing, or you don't stop, but put a duty on a fully built up motorcycle. If you bring complete semi-knockdown kits, get an incentive so that then you can employ people. That can create, and we have shown and we've presented that to the national government, that you can create 1.4 million jobs across the country. Even without saying, oh, you know, this country produces this. Motorcycle alone, cut across 1.4 million jobs. Then the next second one is export-led growth.
Yes.
We are driving that. That has been adopted by the cabinet. And now we need to put in the real soft infrastructure to make sure that happens. The other one is industrializing agriculture. This is an agricultural country. Every part of this country has a potential to grow something. If you go to Middle East, where we're getting fruits from, Egypt, Israel, it's actually a desert. I think when they look at us, and they look at what we call semi-arid, they really should be wondering what we talk about, you know? Because then they operate from a desert. So if we can industrialize our agriculture, and we know, if you are doing, which is a common maize, where are you going to take your maize after 1 year or after 7 months, and at what price? So the farmers have a certainty. Okay. And then SME development. SME cuts across the country. So we are developing those and creating ecosystem for SMEs, looking at how do you access finance, how do you access markets, both wherever you are, other counties. So not specifically saying Nyandarua needs to have a potato processing plant or Nairobi needs to have this, but there are things that are cross-cutting. But I think the most important thing is to make sure we are competitive both at the county level, national level, to be able for people to be able to invest.
Definitely.
Yes.
And the year is young.
The year is young.
The strategies are lengthy. Yes. It's covering 2023 to 2025. Yes. So we have time to hold you guys accountable. And we'll be having this conversation subsequently, maybe some other parts of the year, to see the progress. Yes. Because that's another thing we do in Kenya, you know?
But yeah, I just wanted to, just before you close.
Yes.
If you walk to any supermarket, any shop, any kiosk across the country, manufacturers are keeping the country moving, going. Everywhere you go, you find a manufactured good. They don't have other things. And all those things, most of them are manufactured here.
Yes.
So I just want to thank our members for keeping the country going.
Definitely, very important to shout out to your members, doing an incredible job, but we still need to work out on those rough edges on matters policy and looking at the opportunities that we can better, especially the year 2023.
Yes.
Mr. Anthony, thank you very much for your time, Anthony Mwangi, the CEO of Kenya Association of Manufacturers, saying that as much as we've made a lot of progress, we still have some more things to smoothen out. Let us change our policy environment. Let us make sure that we are giving priority to what exactly is happening in the country and the opportunities within. Yeah, that's why Kenya Association of Manufacturers have a 2023 to 2025 strategy, which will play a critical role even in the achievement of the goal of having 20% GDP contribution by the year 2030. That is Matters Manufacturing. Thank you very much. I'm Noki Kimboy. I live with the market.